Welcome to the Convocation Unscripted, where religion, culture, and politics intersect in real time. I'm one of your hosts for this episode, Jamar Tisby, joined by Kristen Dumay
Hey Jamar, good to see you.
and Robbie Jones.
Hey, Jamar.
In absentia is Diana Butler Bass. She is getting prepped for the Southern Lights Conference, which I am glad to join her at this year. And so she is with us in spirit. As usual, we are scholars, three historians, a sociologist. We explore how religion shapes America's past and present. But the kicker is we're responding in real time to the events of the day. There's no prep, no scripts, just raw, unfiltered conversation. And that's why we call it the Convocation Unscripted. This episode is officially in session. Um, what a time. What a year this 3 weeks has been.
Yeah.
Um, any words to describe your moods right now?
Well, you may not have heard, I just let out a big exhale. I'm not sure how much the mic caught it, but I feel like I have caught myself and like during the day, right? Just like just taking a breath, holding it, exhaling it slowly, and it's all about managing stress, and just managing the volume of things, kind of coming at us all. And hearing from friends from Minneapolis, hearing, not just the headlines, but like actually people we know, right, that are kind of caught, in this nightmare.
Yeah, we've been talking about feeling overwhelmed for a couple years now, for a lot this past year, and then the first 3 weeks now, my goodness, right? It does just keep ratcheting up. And for me, it's been a dilemma. Robbie, you and I were just talking about this before we came on, of what it's like to try to finish a book, right? You're just wrapping one up. I'm in the last 3 weeks with my manuscript, and it is absolutely grueling. And so I feel like I'm holding an entire manuscript in my head, all the edits,
Mm.
all the changes, feedback, and then taking a glance at the world, and it's so much to track, and it's really hard not to despair, not to be filled with despair, and then the temptation to just block it off, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes you have to, like I do, chunks of a day. It's just I can't do anything about it. I have to just do the work. And then I take another look again, and it's always there, and it's always getting worse. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's where we all are right now. How about you, Jamar?
100%. Only recently, I'd say in the past several weeks, have I gotten to the point where it's like I read something awful and it strikes me emotionally, and I'm like, I can't do anything about it right now. So I got to keep taking the next step, keep moving forward in my little sphere of influence, whatever I can do, that's what I have to focus on. And that feeling, it really kind of feels like the power is being stripped from your hands, like it's out of your direct influence, and you somehow have to figure out a way to keep living in the midst of that. So that's been disorienting. And then to your point, Robbie, about just the deep sighs and the breathing and the managing stress, the very first notion I had when it came back in November 24 that he had won the election was we have lost our day-to-day sense of peace, of
Yeah.
stability, right? It's not saying that life was perfect. It was saying that there was a certain sort of predictability
Yeah.
to our socio-political realm that, I mean, the first thing I thought about was major policy changes by tweet.
Yeah.
Friday night, you get some screed from the president's smartphone that completely upends generations of precedent. And that has happened almost daily for the past year. So I immediately knew that we were never gonna we were always gonna be on edge with this president, right? It's like living with somebody who's abusive. You got to be so sensitive to their moods and their moves, and that state of hypervigilance just wears on you. So that's where I am.
Yeah. I was thinking about, so I know, Jamar, you're like head down, also trying to write not only for now, but you're working on a book too, right? And one of the like weird things that I think it does the kind of process of writing a book and particularly getting toward the end of it is you have to project yourself forward to the publication date. And you keep having to ask yourself, where are we going to be living when this book actually sees the light of day? Right. I'm writing it right now. And every week, like you said, every 3 weeks seems like a year. Right. And so, like, my book and Kristen's book are both going to be out the first 2 weeks of September. That is not that far away, but it feels like I really feel like I'm not quite sure I can imagine where we're going to be, right? Even in September, and goodness knows, right? If your book is coming out in 27, after the midterm elections, such as they may be, where we'll be, So there's kind of like back and forth between, and that should not be that hard. It should not be that hard to imagine, oh, what is 8 months from now going to be like? That just should not be that hard to imagine. But I think there's a real sense of vertigo, that
Mm.
even trying to push out that far seems like a wild act of the imagination to try to figure out.
Well, and this is a challenge, right? To write a book that releases 9 to 12 months after it's out of your hands, but it's just a daily life challenge, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what will the economy be like?
Hmm.
Will we be in a war with Europe? Um, I booked some international travel. Will flights be grounded over Greenland? What will be left of our Constitution at that point? Book tour. Will we be free to travel and say the things that we say? It's just what will this world look like, not just for those on the front lines, but for all of us, the
Yeah.
economy, foreign policy, right? You realize just how much you took for granted. I think you used the word
Hmm.
stability or predictability, right? The plans that we make. And you can never plan for your future, right? You never know what's around the corner, sicknesses and job losses and things like that. But what I realize is I had assumed a somewhat stable world, right?
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
underneath the unpredictability, there was some deep sense of stability. My place in the world might fluctuate, but like the world as we know it wasn't going to dramatically change, or so it seemed. And now the expectation is that it will dramatically change. We just don't know in how many ways and in how many directions, and what the consequences will be for all of us. It's a crazy time.
This is why we are so appreciative of our listeners and our viewers. We need to cling to community more than ever right now. Like the one caution I think we can all say without reservation is that isolation is the enemy. To go through this on your own, to just doom scroll on your phone and sink deeper and deeper into a sense of despair or futility, that is a recipe for defeat. No one has the strength to look at this hellscape that we're now in and do it on their own. So even if it's a parasocial relationship like with hosts on a podcast, that's better than nothing. So thank you for tuning in. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of upbeat news. We're feeling this way for a reason. And if there's a theme around all of this, or a most public face of all the doom and gloom, it's ICE. It's this crackdown on uh, immigrants and immigration. So we've seen in the past week just some horrific developments with this. First of all, we know that national attention was zoomed in on the murder of Renee Goode, which was just what, barely a week ago. Now we actually have some autopsy results that show in more detail what happened. Kristen, did you want to fill us in on that?
Yeah, so these were just released this afternoon. Private autopsy results reported in the New York Times and other media outlets. And the preliminary results describe two of the gunshots being not immediately life-threatening. One of them struck her on her left forearm, another through her breast, but did not penetrate major organs. And then the third, from the left side, was shot through her head. And for those who have seen the footage, this was the third shot. This appears to be the shot that killed her, and it is also the shot that is least defensible in terms of the agent claiming this was done in self-defense, right? I mean, all of them are disputable. This is without a doubt you, very hard to make that case. And this was, what we're sitting with today. And I think that as we go on and discuss other events of the week, other responses to this shooting, protests, that we need to just sit with this for a moment. The news cycle moves on so quickly, and everybody has a spin, or at least a lot of people do. And let's just go back to the original footage, the original event, and knowing the shot that killed her, that took her life, was that third shot.
I always talk about how we tend to understand history to the extent that we do in an impressionistic way, where we have these vague ideas, an impression of what happened, but when you get the details and the specifics, it hits like a gut punch. And that's what this autopsy of Renee Goode does. And I remember reports that the ICE agents were preventing a doctor who was there
Yes.
from administering medical care in the immediate aftermath.
And I believe she had a pulse for 8 minutes after being shot. So that also comes to play.
The human element here kind of leaves us at a loss for words. And she's not the only one, unfortunately. Typically, what happens, especially in law enforcement, is what grabs the public's attention is just one of many examples. And so we're hearing now also reports that people, once they've been taken in custody, they're experiencing deadly brutality as well. Robbie, did you had heard about such a case as well, I think.
Yeah, I think I've just been so taken by the willful, even gleeful brutality of
Yeah.
ICE. And they're recruiting that way too. I mean, that's the other thing to say here. They're deliberately recruiting militia type folks. The training they're not giving people de-escalation training. They're telling them, I mean, JD Vance, right, told them you have complete and total immunity, right, to do whatever you want to do. So when you recruit them, telling them they are removing the poison from the country, and you tell them that no matter, and you arm them to the teeth with military grade weapons and gear, and then you tell them that no matter what they do, the government will have their back and make sure that there's no consequences. This is what you get, and we all saw the video. We all saw there was absolutely no threat to the ICE officer's life, and particularly for that third shot, right? It was well out of the way of the vehicle by the time that third shot is fired. And then this other, death, and there's several others, right? But the one that made the headlines today, that there was a Cuban immigrant named Geraldo Lunas Campos, who had been held in solitary confinement at an detention facility in Texas. And the official sort of government DHS kind of explanation for this is that he had tried to hang himself, and he had tried to commit suicide. But he was arrested. He's like transferred over to this camp in East Montana, and he's actually one of three deaths reported in a month at this camp. So it's kind of sprawling tent city on the grounds of Fort Bliss, which is an army base. But the story that he committed suicide, but there's a witness now that says that he actually became unresponsive while he was handcuffed, held down by four or five guards, and strangled until he passed out. And that's what happened. And the coroner's report, I'm happy that we even got a autopsy report, but we did that basically said yes, that's what happened. These are not consistent with wounds that somebody would have committing suicide or trying to hang themselves. These are absolutely consistent with someone being forcibly asphyxiated and strangled. So this is someone who's in custody, right? They're disarmed, they're in custody, um, and here we are just willfully. I mean, it brings me back to uh, George Floyd, right? Someone who's completely restrained, not a threat, and this willful extinguishing of a life because they can. And there's is that kind of hardening of uh, compassion, empathy, any sort of humanity that I fear is going to run rampant amid ICE and actually DHS as a whole, right? If you look at their Twitter feed, they are like just fomenting this hateful, violent vision of law enforcement and racist vision of law enforcement, right? I mean, this is what we're saying too that Minneapolis, ICE is actually even targeting off-duty police officers
Yes.
in Minneapolis, and the white police chief in Minneapolis held a press conference and said this is happening, and he said, by the way, the only ones being targeted are officers of color,
Yeah.
right? Not white. So but it's the brutality and this, I mean, this is an American Gestapo forming, right before our eyes. It's the thing I keep coming back to over and over again. It's the Stasi, it's the Gestapo, it's the secret police, and there are going to be 10,000 of them that are coming online in this coming year.
Let me tell you, this is why I'm unapologetically passionate about reforming, transforming the criminal legal system in the United States. Because what we see ICE doing on the streets is just the tip of the iceberg. So I taught for several semesters in prisons in Mississippi and Kentucky. And if you think what we see out on the streets is brutal, just imagine what's happening behind closed doors in a jail or a prison where guards who are not highly qualified, these are not the cream of the crop folks in any sense of the word. A lot of them there just for a paycheck, but they have nearly absolute power and almost zero accountability. And the most dangerous part about it is that it's out of public view. There's no one to watch, there's no one to see. The reports that we get have to scratch and claw their way through all kinds of obfuscation. And those are just the ones that we hear about. I was just reading from Mississippi Today publication,
Mm,
and they were talking about Rankin County, which is right next to Jackson, and literally decades of abuse, including a case very similar to the one you just brought up, Robbie, of someone who was incarcerated being asphyxiated due to their brutality, and then the massive cover up of people covering up for one another and no justice being done. It 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 unleashes this system unleashes the worst elements of our inhumanity toward one another. And to me, what supercharges it is the secrecy and the lack of accountability, which both are related. If nobody
yeah,
sees you, nobody can hold you accountable. But even if they do see you, when you've got, in the case of ICE, from the highest level saying, no, we got your back. Don't worry about it. Department of Justice not even investigating the officer who killed Renee Goode. Like, what's to stop you? And then you're getting paid on top of it. It is the worst cocktail of inhumanity that
yeah.
that 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 we're seeing, but so much more that we're not seeing. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to equivocate about how heinous the system is because I've seen grown men in prison reduced to almost a childlike state because their every move is controlled and they have to get permission and they have to appease and they have to even to use the bathroom ask permission, right? So it's horrible. And if we had listened, people were so up in arms about the phrase abolish the police, abolish ICE. But if we had even done the littlest bit to pay attention to what was actually happening, maybe we would have put up guardrails before we have this multi-billion dollar personal army of the president unleashed on the population.
Hmm.
I think it's worth reflecting too that this inhumanity, right? This inhumane treatment, the cruelty, the lack of any accountability, that the way for this has been prepared through the rhetoric, right? You
Yeah.
mentioned the social media feeds, but really, this goes back a long, long time, and particularly, just in terms of the Trump administration. Remember that the first inaugural American Carnage, and the way this works, right, is that the world is divided into good and evil. And those who side with Trump and MAGA are good, no matter what, right? And anybody who opposes evil. And what do you do with evil? Evil has to be destroyed. You don't have a right to exist, right? And anytime you run afoul of the regime and the regime's laws and their interpretations of the laws or ignoring the laws, right? That's on you. And to see the commentary coming out in light of Renee Goode's killing, so many good Christian people saying that's what happens when you don't obey. That's
Yeah.
what happens. Gleeful, gleeful, right? Who deserves to live and who deserves to die? And I think that if you pay attention, you're going to be shocked at the answer and how when we see, like you said, Robbie, this is going to grow. These forces are going to grow 10,000. We've just seen revealed a secret memo that ICE is given permission, unconstitutional permission, to enter people's homes, citizens' homes, anybody's homes now, right? These basic constitutional rights that our country was founded on for very good reason are being tossed aside, right? Deliberately so. And half of this country is cheering it on, confident that they're the half that's somehow going to end up on top here.
And I will say too that by entering people's homes, what we mean and what we've seen is a battering ram in the middle of the night, right? No warrant, just we think this is where somebody we want is, and we clearly unconstitutional. Clearly, courts have ruled against this, and yet they've just issued the secret memo, says they issued their own guidance to say, yeah, whatever, you're fine. I want to add one other detail because I think this is really important. I've talked a lot about. I mean, the thing that really haunts me um, is this kind of Gestapo-like secret police force, but it's also concentration camps on U.S. soil, and I just continue to say we have to make this a bright line. The man I was talking about, who was killed, Geraldo Campos, was actually arrested in New York, outside of Rochester, but then whisked away to East Montana, right? And so think about that for a moment. That's the practice of kind of whisking people away, unmarked cars, masked agents. They ship them across the country somewhere they have no family, no connections to attorneys, those kinds of things. And the place he got shipped, right, was this. It's called Camp East Montana. It was part of a $1.2 billion contract
Mm.
that is expected now to become the largest detention facility in the U.S. And get this, it was awarded to a private contractor whose headquarters is listed as a single family home in Richmond, Virginia, a place called
What?
Acquisition Logistics. No prior experience running anything like this. Um, and you can bet cronies, right? Of this is sort of the where the cash shows up in this whole evil system. But like $1.2 billion we are spending right now to build a concentration camp in East Montana where people can just get whisked off the street, disappear over there, handcuffed, held to the ground by 4 or 5 people, and strangled to death with impunity.
It doesn't get any better. One of the things that is now capturing the attention of a lot of us is this haunting image of an adorable 5-year-old boy named Liam who has been uh, arrested, detained, kidnapped. What's the right word here? He's got a Spider-Man backpack on. This in Minneapolis. He's got this blue hat with white floppy ears and strings, very appropriate for a kid his age, being herded into an unmarked ICE vehicle. And the story behind it is absolutely gutting. So he came back from preschool, not even in kindergarten yet, preschool, and was taken into custody along with his father. Mind you, they have a pending asylum case and no order of deportation. So it's not that they're breaking the law here, but that doesn't stop ICE anymore. Um, so while they're in the driveway, father's waiting for him to get home. They detain the father, but then they essentially use Liam as bait. So there was an official, the superintendent of the area public schools there said another adult living in the home was outside and begged agents to let them take care of the small child, but the agents refused to let this other relative to take care of the boy. Quote, instead, the agent took the child out of the still running vehicle, led him to the door, and directed him to knock on the door, asking to be let in order to see if anyone else was home, essentially using the 5-year-old as bait. So if they wouldn't answer the door for an ICE agent, maybe they would answer the door for this 5-year-old child. And then they didn't release the father or the child. They are both whisked off, I believe, to a detention facility in Texas.
Right? In Texas. I mean, that's the thing, right? Like not across
Right
town,
nearby.
across the
Yeah.
country. Yeah.
This is you've lost the plot as a human being at this point. You're using a 5-year-old to bait other adults to come out, and then you still detain the 5-year-old while another relative is there saying, if you got to take the father, at least leave the child with us, and then refuses to do that. Like you've lost your humanity. What on earth? What can we also talk about? Can we also talk about Reagan said he had these great one-liners that white evangelicals loved. And he's like,
Mhm.
the most dangerous words to
Oh,
hear
I've been
are
thinking about
a
this
knock
week
on the
too,
door.
Jamar.
I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, can we, y'all are experts. Help me understand this. Because for years, people on the right, from the grassroots to the elites, have said we need our Second Amendment rights in case the government encroaches. And now they're openly sending memos and violating the Fourth Amendment against unlawful search and seizure. Now they can bust into your house. So, why is it fine now for the federal government to bust in your house? And the folks on the far right who are saying, well, this is what we said would happen, not a peep, not a mumbling word of dissent. What is going on here?
They are fine if it happens to us, right? And live in some fantasy world that it's not going to come back and happen to a good number of them down the road, right? This is just the short-sightedness, but I think it's just selfishness and cruelty at heart. Again, the this has been seeded for a very long time, and what still shocks me, and shouldn't as a Calvinist, but what still shocks me is how people have just eaten this up, right? What is it that seems to delight so many Americans right now when they see the suffering of others, when they see cruelty towards others? right?
Mm,
When they see lives being destroyed, snuffed out, what is it that makes them feel good about themselves, good about what they see unfolding? I mean, honestly, it's hard not to go into a psychological or spiritual space to grapple with this because my rational sense is just coming up short.
mm,
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking, it's so funny, Jamar. I've been thinking about that exact same thing this week. And it is that, as Kristen said, it's this, freedom for me, but not for thee, logic. And as Kristen also says, I think that's exactly right. I mean, you watch the way this happens in other nations and other histories. It always grows, right? And the net gets tighter and tighter, and the people who are outside the net get smaller and smaller, and the people inside the net get bigger and bigger. So this is coming for all of us, right? And certainly for anyone that doesn't just consent to this madness. Anyone who sticks their head above and says enough, right? Even out of a deep sense of humanity and compassion for a 5-year-old is going to get accused of being a domestic terrorist. And that word, by the way, has no legal basis in U.S. law. It's going to keep saying that over and over again. There's no such thing as a domestic terrorist in U.S. based law. It's a word they've just invented, right? And are now trying to define it against anyone who has holds a dissenting view against this regime. But I do think there is something um, that you see. Like I remember, like there were several. And Kristen, you know this history better than I do. But there were many of the sort of special police in Nazi Germany were actually wearing skulls on their insignia, right? And it was literally to say like we have the power of literally of life and death over all of you. And there is something intoxicating about that kind of power, I think, that
mm,
evil
mm,
thrives on. And so when you look at those ads for ICE agents, they are trading on this. We will give you this power, right? And you will be able to be God's vengeance in the world against all the evil people. I mean, that's the messaging that we're
Yep.
we're seeing, and there is something really intoxicating. If you really believe that, right, that you're going to be the sword of God to rid the world of evil. I mean, there is something quite powerful about that. And it's evil, but it's quite powerful.
So you use the word domestic terrorism, and just randomly, I thought about, well, how do you define it? Because it looks like we're seeing this in real time from the federal government. So I actually looked up how the FBI defines terrorism, and it says violent criminal acts committed by individuals and or groups to further ideological goals stemming from domestic influences such as those of political, religious, social, racial, or environmental nature. Violent criminal acts to further ideological goals, political, religious, social, racial, environmental. And so that caused me to ask, and so what do we call what ICE is doing? Because it sounds a lot like this definition of
Yeah.
terrorism. And I mean that in the sense of it's designed to instill terror. It is designed to be public, to be provocative, to be brutal, and to be terrifying, to intimidate people into falling into line, and to make them feel disempowered that they can't do anything about it. And that's textbook, even according to the government's own definition of terrorism. And it's coming directly from the federal government. So I thought that was interesting. I also often say that when it comes to certain kinds of conservatives or right leaning, the principles often seem to be selective. So we take big government, for example.
Yeah.
That's always been the thing. We don't want big government. There's too much spending, blah, blah, blah. Unless it comes to military spending, billions toward ICE, whatever their sort of pet project is, well, then big government's okay. So it's not truly principled. It's what you mentioned before, Robbie, for me, but not for thee. If all this money for welfare is going to like black and brown people, Somalis, right, in Minneapolis, then it's bad. But if we want to go pay $100,000 to every citizen in Greenland, that's fine, big government. That's fine. So it's always selective. So, be careful with these blanket statements about, the far right is against XYZ. No, they're only against it when it's for other people. When it's for them, they're perfectly fine with it. Oh, they hated Obama or Biden using executive orders. But Trump issuing a record number by far executive order, well, that's fine. The executive should have that power, right? So it's always selective, and I find that interesting
Yeah.
slash frustrating.
I do want to give one shout out to, and I always want to do this when you do find people who are conservative in many ways and standing on principle now. So David Beer at the Cato Institute, nobody's accused the Cato Institute of being liberal or woke. Um,
Just wait.
but he has been very consistently calling out ICE as a threat to U.S. civil liberties at the Cato Institute. And they've been putting out reports, kind of very critical of ICE and looking at public opinion and just highlighting, like, no, this is not, this is not a libertarian view of the world. ICE is not embodying
Yeah.
that. So, it's worth just kind of noting that there are a few voices, but for most of them, yeah, you're absolutely right. It was never about a principle. It was about an ideology, and it was about power, and it was about power in the hands of white Christian people.
And the principles, right, employed uh towards the ideology, right? That's what this was. Tomorrow when you're talking about this selectivity, I kept thinking of conversations around biblical literalism. Right? The
Mm,
same thing
mm,
too, right? They'll pick which passages get the literal treatment, and they'll tell you exactly how they ought to be interpreted. But then you try to bring up the, passages about the poor or the immigrant or about loving your neighbor or about any host of things, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden it gets very complicated. You need some textual analysis here, and it doesn't actually say what you think it says. Totally not, right? It's just like enough already, and
mm,
yet somehow that they're able to lead with it with confidence and make people do their bidding. But I agree, Robbie. When you can find those people who stand on principle, it's encouraging, and at the same time, they are so few and far between, right? And
Yeah.
that
mm,
is really what is stunning. I really thought a few more people, um,
Yeah.
actually had some principles. I really did. I really thought a greater percentage of conservatives and Republicans actually had some principles that went beyond their
yeah.
own power. Silly
Yeah.
me.
Mm,
And I'm just going to keep saying again, I feel like it's like Nineveh, right? Like, just give me five righteous people. That it would only take five Republicans right now in the House to stop all this. Like every week, I keep thinking, like, where are the five Republicans? Just five, like that would stand with the Democrats and say enough already, right? And put country before party. And that's what's so disheartening is that you can't even find five righteous Republicans in this Congress.
It
mm.
would change the course of this country
Yeah,
instantaneously.
Good
On
Lord.
one issue, everything could change.
My mind is immediately jumping to like, well, how do we put pressure on
Yeah.
this group
yeah,
to just be like, listen, we don't need everybody.
Yeah.
And then Kristen, ages ago, you brought up a great point about when you do get dissenters, you have to let them know you have their back. That when they do speak up, when they do stick their necks out there, you have to let them know that we're going to be there to support you, whatever the consequences are coming your way. You're not going to stand alone. And I don't know, man. It feels like tactically there's something to that. I mean, we know they're known actors. We know who the representatives are. We know even probably across the spectrum in terms of, extreme MAGA never going to change to
Yeah.
maybe there's an
some of them
inch.
voted to impeach Trump, uh,
Yeah.
and
Let's
now
start
can't
there.
find their
You know,
spine. Yeah,
like I'd be interested in sort of liberals or progressives kind of inviting them in and saying, listen, I know we disagree on most things, but on country over party, can we find common ground? And if you do, here's how we'll support you, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe that stuff's happening. I don't know. This is the kind of stuff I'd love to see from the Democratic Party and other large organizers, but
Yeah, and people, right? People, people are showing up to protest sites. They're showing up to bear witness. And you talked about, Jamar, what happens when there are no eyes, no accountability, right? Inside prisons and detainment camps. One of the things that has been so remarkable to see is ordinary citizens showing up day in, day out in the bitter cold so that there
mm,
are eyes
mm.
on what ICE is doing, right? So that we have the video, so that we actually know about these people, so that we can see the footage for ourselves, right? When horrific things happen. And so, bearing witness is really key. And at this point, it's fair to say, those who are showing up are putting themselves at risk now
Yeah.
and at a future point. And they keep showing up. Hundreds, thousands keep showing up for the training. And
Mm.
so, if ordinary folks can do that and brave the cold and set aside their priorities, I'm sure they'd rather be doing other things and show up day after day after day. What about our representatives? I really think we should be asking much, much more from them.
So as we talk about stuff to do, people are taking action, and I want to highlight this protest that has garnered a lot of controversy. It was a church protest where people were, well, I'll just read from the newspaper reports. Anti-immigration enforcement protesters disrupted a service at a Southern Baptist church in Minnesota. About 3 dozen protesters entered the city's church in St. Paul during Sunday service. Some walked right up to the pulpit, others loudly chanting "Ice out" and "Renee Goode." And then one of the church's pastors, the reason why they chose this church, one of the church's pastors is named David Easterwood, and he leads the local ICE field office. So what they were protesting was a pastor, a person in church leadership, also leading these ICE raids and crackdowns and the brutalization and the things that lead to the murder of people like Renee Goode. And so there's a lot of news and updates. One of the protest organizers was arrested. Her name was Nikema Levy Armstrong. I believe she's now released, but she was former head of the NAACP there. She's also an ordained pastor as well, and a black woman. Some others, like a journalist, are named as defendants in a lawsuit that's being leveled against these folks. And so, and then the response from the right is kind of predictable. But Christian, I know you've been paying attention to these things. When this happened, how did folks in that church and on the Christian right, especially, how are they talking about it?
First, let's just um, you know, point out that this church, it's not a random church. Easterwood, yes, ICE field officer, pastor. It's also a church in the that was, I think, planted. It's certainly pastored by Joe Rigney, kind of Doug Wilson's right-hand man. Tight connections between this church and the church plant in DC in the CREC denomination. That's where Pete Hegseth's pastor is moving from Tennessee to take over that church. If you know these networks, if you know these Christian nationalist networks from the Doug Wilson camps and the Southern Baptist Convention, this church is ground zero. Okay. So this is not just kind of a random church. It's not just an evangelical church. I don't know if Nikema Levy Armstrong knew this. I don't know what their who their audience was and their intended audience and so forth. But just as somebody who does track some of these networks, it's important to realize kind of what else that church represents. Um, and the response in spaces on the right was instantaneous, unified messaging, right? Crying persecution, This is being referred to as the St. Paul Church riots now. I think it's important to note that while disruptive, it was entirely nonviolent, and but resounding condemnation and calls for churches to defend themselves against such incursions, for security teams, and encouragement for the government to use the power of the sword to defend the right to worship. And so, what struck me is, once again, as we were talking about, the kind of double standard. So, when we have the Trump administration, kind of repealing policies to not send ICE into churches, right?
Yeah.
And having safe areas in schools and so on, right? Not a peep. But when you have a nonviolent protest movement, right, from the other side, and absolutely up in arms and calling for the full force of the law and then some to be used against these protesters. But know that it was instantaneous and kind of resounding message, and very much on message talking points that came from the right in response. And so, in some ways, it reminded me a little bit of the immediate aftermath of the Charlie Kirk shooting. I hadn't seen that kind of unified and whether coordinated or organic response of that sort, and kind of going on the offensive than the since last October.
Hmm. Uh, Robbie, did you hear about this protest? Did you have any sort of immediate or reflex thoughts,
Yeah. Well,
unscripted
it's
thoughts?
it's complicated, right? Because the law clearly protects their doing whatever they're going to do outside on public property, right? So you can protest outside a church. You can, even if it's loud, you could clearly do that outside. It's not so clear. In fact, they may have broken the law by going inside the church, to do this. So it's complicated, right? And I'm sympathetic to, again, because I was outraged when, exactly as Kristen said, when the Trump administration removed a decades long policy that the government would not go inside of sensitive locations, of which churches were one, churches, schools, hospitals, right? Precisely because that's the way the government can be humane
Yes.
while enforcing the law, right? And the Trump administration ripped that off, that both Republican and Democratic administrations have held up, so that they could go inside of churches and have been staking out churches to arrest people. So there is a totally double standard here. So it's complicated, I think, what happened, because it did go inside, and it certainly was disruptive. But I think the thing that it still made me think of, when I knew the church was a Southern Baptist church. I mean, it is one that has these ties to Doug Wilson and this kind of hard Christian nationalist movement, but as well. But it made me think of, like, oh wait, where are the other times when I've seen demonstrations happen inside Southern Baptist churches? And it's in my hometown of Jackson, Mississippi, right? In June of 1963, it was like June 9th, I think. Uh, Medgar Evers actually had a whole campaign focused on the downtown white Christian churches to integrate, like, not, they weren't voluntarily doing it, just forced them to kind of face the segregation issue. And on that morning, like, Medgar Evers actually drove, and what they would do is they had a group of kind of mixed race, half white, half black contingency that would enter these churches. And a lot of times they'd be met. In fact, when they tried to go to First Baptist Jackson, they were met at the door with deacons who were acting as bouncers, and just looked at the skin tones and said, "Oh yeah, you can come in. You three, not so much." And then the group said, "No, no, it's all of us or none of us." And they were actually turned away. There, they went to Galloway Memorial Methodist Church, where they made it past the front doors, got in, and then were forcibly booted out of the just for having African Americans in the courtroom. That's the church. They targeted that church for political reasons because it was the church that Mayor Allen Thompson, the segregationist mayor of Jackson, attended. First Baptist is where the racist segregationist mayor Ross Barnett attended. So they targeted these two churches for very intentional reasons. But then they were like forcibly hauled out of the church. And then it went on. And the other echo here is that in the calls for the government to protect these white churches, the way that the city of Jackson responded to their own mayor's church being targeted is the city council passed a new ordinance that made it a crime to disturb divine worship. Was the term that they used, and it was actually a crime that had a $500 fine and 6 months in jail for violating that they then enforced throughout this campaign. But what's notable to me is that like the last thing that Medgar Evers organized was this campaign to force white Christians to face what they were doing. And in fact, he was shot and murdered in his own driveway just days after dropping those worshipers off at First Baptist Jackson and Galloway Memorial to try to forcibly integrate these churches. So it had like, these echoes, and particularly the Parnell, the pastor of the church, and the statements that were released by the Wisconsin and uh, Minnesota convention that were these statements right out of the 1960s that the white churches were making the case that no, this place like should be a place where we go to get away from the world, and the stuff outside the world doesn't really concern us here. We're here just to worship Jesus, right? And that's the words that we heard right out of the mouths, this week. So even though it's complicated, even though had I been doing it, I might have thought tactically about doing it a slightly different way. It does remind me of this sense of these white Southern Baptist churches that thought it was their right to sort of uphold this white Christian nationalist worldview and to not be disturbed by the outside world, right? And their private little worshiping, really, of a white Jesus in those spaces.
I wasn't there, and I'm not on the ground in Minneapolis to know what it's like to be in a city literally under siege. I'm in
Yeah.
Louisville, and I got here in early 23, so a few years after Breonna Taylor, but you could still feel the effects of what it was like to be in an epicenter for national attention focused on this grave injustice that had happened. So I'm very sensitive to the mood. It is, we opened the show talking about how we're feeling. I can only imagine what it's like to be in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area where this, stuff we're getting through a screen is actually happening right on their neighborhood streets.
Yeah.
So I don't
Hey,
I don't I
Jamar,
don't really have yeah.
I was just going to like, I just want to read one message that I think a couple of us have seen. I won't say who it's from, but it's from a friend in the cities. I think just gives you the sense of this, right?
Mm.
I'm just going to give you a couple of words. Like, today has been an all-out ICE assault across the Twin Cities. Observers gassed and arrested, multiple minors taken by ICE, casing schools and daycare centers. It's the most scared I've been since they came to Minnesota. People I know were even pulled over, maybe mistaken identity, maybe not. Skipped my son's basketball game because it didn't feel safe to be out. Like that's the kind of day-to-day fear, right? That people are living with, and this was from a white U.S. citizen, right? This is not from a person of color or someone who is a naturalized citizen or a migrant of any kind. So, like, that's just the general pressure cooker, right? That people are living in right now in the Twin Cities.
Thank you for that, Robbie, because I think it just highlights like real easy to be sort of an armchair commentator from where we sit behind our mics. And so I want to be very circumspect about that. All I'll say is we're going to see more different kinds of protests because as they're ramping up the pressure, I think now they're sending 3,000 ICE agents into the area. As that increases, the people are going to feel an increasing pressure to act and to resist. And their protests are going to get more pointed and more disruptive. I deeply and sincerely hope it remains nonviolent, even from a tactical perspective. It's harder, it's also more effective long term. There's a book, Why Civil Resistance Works. It just studied hundreds of these conflicts across the globe and said, on the whole, not only is it more effective in the short term, but nonviolent protest is more effective at keeping democratic processes in the long term and not being subject to more conflict or more civil war later. Because as evangelicals talking about evangelizing taught me, what you win them with is what you win them to. And so if
Hmm.
you gain power through violence, then it will continue to be violence that people keep or extend power. So I deeply and sincerely hope they remain nonviolent, but we're going to see a lot more tactics. And by the way, this is exactly what it felt like during the civil rights movement when you had different organizations talking about in different ways how to protest, how to resist, and disagreeing amongst each other. And at the end of the day, some was more effective than others, but it also took a variety of tactics. And so, all of our hearts go out, of course, to the people most directly impacted by ICE crackdowns nationally, but especially in Minneapolis, where so much of the attention has been focused. So I think we should all be sort of circumspect about, what people on the ground are doing. At the same time, like, gear up. I mean, get ready. There's going to be a lot more of this in a lot more places. And this is where the rubber hits the road about what we're willing to do, about what principles we actually stand on, and if in the name of justice and solidarity and love of neighbor, we're willing to put our bodies on the line for what has already affected many and what will continue to affect many more. Any other thoughts on this week's wildness?
I just want to say, like, as you were saying, sending more, talking about sending U.S. Army troops, sending more ICE agents. If we just kind of back up for a minute and like, there is no plausible reason in the universe why Minneapolis, Minnesota should be the place where this is happening, right? There's no analysis that would make any sense of this, right? I think, and I don't know, right? My guess is, yeah, exactly. My guess is, it's some combination of Trump's war on DEI and George Floyd being from Minneapolis. It's also Tim Walz being the governor, his former opponent. So this is all personal kind of vendetta, stuff is my best guess. But there's no rational reason, right? But what they do need is a trial balloon for doing this in a city,
Yeah.
because you can bet what's going to happen is uh, as soon as they decide they've reaped enough terror in Minneapolis, they're coming to a city near you, right? Those people aren't going to live. They're not moving into Minneapolis. They're staying in hotels in Minneapolis, and they're soon
We're
going to
paying
check.
for them.
Yeah, we're
Yeah, we're
paying
paying
for
for
it,
them.
and they're going to check out of those hotels,
Yeah.
get in the planes that we're paying for, by the way, fly to some other city and overwhelm the local law enforcement in those cities as well. Like, it's a model that they're building here. And it just, I think we sort of, I mean, I at least was like even losing the thread until you said, like, sending more. I was like, what in the world would like justify sending more agents to that one city? Because what they need to show is this sort of like how we can just overwhelm, right? And just exert this kind of power at will. And we've got Greg Bovino, clown that he is, cosplaying in his Nazi uniform, right? He's wearing this Nazi looking overcoat, by the way, which is not standard issue government fare, right? This is a
Mm.
costume he's put on for the cameras, right? To kind of look the part here. And this is what we're dealing with.
So, Jamar, MLK Day. You were out here in
Yeah.
Michigan,
Yeah.
came out to West Michigan and gave a talk at Hope College. And before we got on, I was telling you, I heard from so many people here in West Michigan who heard you speak either in person or via the live stream, and they were blown away. In this moment, you brought hope and you inspired them to act. What did you say? Because we could use them right now.
Amen. Yeah.
I, first of all, shout out to Hope College faculty, staff, administrators for still doing talks like these, still inviting people like me. This has been the um the season of MLK and Black History Month where I've received the least invitations to speak since I've been a public speaker, really, at least since the publication of my first book. And so I spoke about the spirit of justice. I spoke about how MLK embodied these virtues that I talk about that are consistent in throughout history of freedom struggles: faith, courage, resilience, and uh, imagination. But my mind, I didn't quote this in the talk, but my mind went to the Nobel Peace Prize, which Trump is obsessed with. And this warmonger who's inflicting violence on his own people and now is also exacting geopolitical retribution. Uh, he wanted this Nobel Peace Prize so bad that Obama got, but also that MLK got. And it brought me back to the words of MLK's acceptance speech for the Nobel Peace Prize. And he said, I accept this award today with an abiding faith in America and an audacious faith in the future of mankind. I refuse to accept despair as the final response to the ambiguities of history. I refuse to accept the idea that the isness of man's present nature makes him morally incapable of reaching up for the eternal oughtness that forever confronts him. And he went on to say, um, I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. And this is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant. That is an audacious hope, an audacious faith. It seems to defy everything that we are seeing, but that is the nature of faith. It goes beyond what we see and what is present right now, not in a emotionally bypassing kind of way, but with an unshakable, untouchable hope in a higher power, in the love of neighbor, and in the long view that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice if we bend it. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Convocation Unscripted. Subscribe to our individual Substacks and to this one, convocation.substack.com. We'll catch you next episode.